This is Donnan and Dayne from UGASports.com. It is our weekly podcast and our chat with the former Georgia head coach Jim Donnan. Coach, how are things going on in your world?
Doing good, just hoping everybody's staying safe and practicing what they need to do. And, it's good to have a voice like yours here to maybe talk a little ball. And hopefully some of our fans can get some good info and relax and kick back and listen to us.
Well, our fan base, it really doesn't matter what's going on. They want to talk the dog, so that's what we're here to do. We know that there's a lot more serious and upfront things happening in the world, and we discussed some of that last week, and we'll continue to monitor that as it relates to Georgia. But we want to talk some ball here. So one of the main questions, Coach, that I've been seeing is how are Georgia coaches communicating with players, especially in terms of the recruiting aspect? How are coaches recruiting players when people are asked to stay home? How do you think that's going on?
Well, one of the things that all of us do is adjust. Whatever you're in business or whatever you're doing, you got to make the situation as good as you can with what you have. And fortunately, with the modern technology, of which you got to be a 5-star guy, we're very fortunate to have you working with us at Rivals. And I don't know how Roddy picks you out, but you can't give him much credit for recruiting. But he did a good job there. So
Does that mean I get a pay
people,
raise? Is that what's happening?
yeah, I'm not sure, but I think it's for dang sure we got somebody who knows how to handle all these different platforms, and that's the same thing with Kirby and all the coaches around the country because you can't all of a sudden just say, "Hey, well, I'm sorry I couldn't get in touch with you," and then all of a sudden this other school's doing a good job of communicating with somebody, and you lose the ground that you made, but. I think the first thing you do is assess where you are and how you stand with the guy and what you need to do to either catch up or maintain or close it out. So, all of us know that Georgia and every staff is working outside the building, so to speak. But daily, staffs have meetings through different platforms. Most of them are using Zoom, where you can actually talk to everybody at once on your staff and get an update, not only about recruiting, but the most prevalent thing is your own players. You got to know what's happening with them, their safety, their are they getting enough food? What can we do for you? And now, as you know, being on the faculty, Georgia's starting next week. Their class is online, so it's getting that set up for tutors and making sure the kids understand what they have to do. So, but from a recruiting standpoint, if you just take out the element of say we're not under this kind of duress, you would have a daily meeting in the spring until you go on the road, and you would either go over a certain position group or go over where you stand with each coach on his prospects, or just kind of a overall state of the dog program daily. And I think that's something that continues on here. I don't know for a fact that it's happening, but I would think where you would go around the table and talk to each coach about how you stand with each kid. That because we do have the early signing date now, which puts a lot of pressure on even more without the official visits that we've missed at this point. So I think the main thing in answering this question without going around all day on it is constant contact with, people need to understand that coaches can't call a kid. They can text them or email them, and then ask them to call them back, which is legal for, say I'm texting you, Dayne Young, a big lineman here. I want you to come give me a call if you can. Can you give me a time? And then the kid will call you back. And then they're spending some time talking to them about different things. And some of the coaches are actually playing video games with them to try to, mesh with them. And I noticed that Texas A&M actually had a video game tournament where they had coaches against prospects. But the main thing is whether it would be a virtual go over what's going to happen when you come on your official visit, whatever it might be, just constant contact. And then, after you do that, then you have to get back to Kirby and the recruiting guys and everything and talk to them about where you stand and what needs to be done. And then with all this extra time, then there's probably a little bit more evaluation going on and time spent looking at the 22 and 23 classes because you got that tape available to maybe spend a little bit more time because you're at home with your family and you hopefully spending that family time. But going over those prospects and analyzing them too and getting a beat on them so you'll be ready again when it starts out. Because here's what's going to happen. Usually speaking, you spend most of the spring, Dane, after G Day, going on the road and not only talking football and to the high school coaches and doing things like that when you're on the road, but also looking at the prospects for the next couple of years. Well, just eyeballing them, watching them practice, and getting an idea. You're going to totally miss that no matter what happens. I mean, you just got to feel like nobody's going to be on the road this spring. So there's got to be a lot of watching of tape and analyzing those guys right now.
One thing that I hear coaches say a lot on signing day is that they talk to more kids in the previous or in the following two classes on that particular day than they did with the kids that signed that day. That so much work is done beforehand. Do you think that helps maybe avoid getting behind in the process a little bit? That for this immediate next class, that Georgia coaches have likely been in contact with a lot of their targets for the past 3 years?
Absolutely. And particularly the head coach, who everybody talks about the Kirby copter, but Kirby spends an inordinate amount of time going around to see the kids that would be rising juniors and not so much the senior class because those guys are already signed. So he goes out, he was down there to Mims's place, to Ferguson's. I'm not going to hit everybody, but he was there. You can't really talk to him. But if Kirby Smart comes in the building or lands out there on the field in a helicopter, it's a pretty good idea that everybody in the whole county knows he's there. So,
Especially in Cochran, Georgia, I promise you
yeah,
that.
just the symbolism of coming in to the school means so much. The fact that you were there, and then one thing that the fans need to understand that head coaches cannot recruit in the spring. So, they made a rule about 4 or 5 years ago that head coaches couldn't go out. So some of the head coaches are griping because they're having other things they had to do, like fundraising and things like that. So they didn't think it was fair for some of them to do it and others not. So they made a rule you can't. So just to make it clear, you can go recruit like crazy until February the 10th or so and go see these rising juniors or and then in the spring the assistant coaches can go but the head coach. So Kirby's got a leg up there on that. So we're not behind in the 220 class but the 221 class, but we definitely are behind in the 222 for sure because just like everybody else you can't go out this spring.
Yeah, everyone's going to be playing catch up at the same time. One place that I think that Georgia and really any school that has a returning head coach, especially for a tenure of 3 or 4 years at least, can you imagine how difficult it is for these new sitting head coaches, whether it be a Mike Leach at Mississippi State, even a Mel Tucker at Michigan State? How do you even begin? Because you don't
Yeah,
even hardly know your current players.
I can't even tell you how much sorrow I have for Lane Kiffin. Not really, no. Lane's a good guy, and I like him. I was just kidding, but it definitely puts him behind the 8 ball, no question. And as you mentioned, Mel Tucker not only having to find out about his own team, which haven't even started spring practice, but also try to catch up on recruiting and even finish up on the 220 class because they ended up with some guys decommitting that day. I saw where they picked up Simmons' brother from over in Atlanta as a running back, but I think it's just going to really put those guys behind, and that just goes with the territory. But in the grand scheme of things, compared to what we're dealing with in society right now, it's just something we've got to understand that you've got to adjust, whether you're in the business world or coaching or whatever it might be. But certainly you got to have a plan. I always say, and your cohort on Film Don't Lie, and Brent Rollins likes me to say this, plan your work and work your plan.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you got to make sure you got a good plan and work the heck out of it. And we got the master in Kirby Smart as far as organization, and I'm sure those guys are really working hard to make sure they take care of things. But there is a silver lining in this from a coaching perspective. I want all the fans to understand. Our coaches make a lot of money and they get a lot of credit, and a lot of blame, but the families involved had a lot of sacrifice because the wives really are with those kids a lot more than the coaches, because you see all the time they spend away from home, and then during the season, long hours and things like that. But I really think that these last couple of weeks have got to be a heartfelt situation for a lot of these kids to get the chance for their dad to wake up in the morning and cook breakfast for them, or whatever it might be. But I just think it's great that these coaches are getting some time with their young kids or older kids or whatever it might be. I think it's really terrific.
You can kind of see that pride come out too. I think I saw a post from Cortez Hankton with his kids, just kind of proud to hang out with them because, like you said, this time of year and really almost any time now in college football, it's pretty much a 24/7 job.
Right, and I hope maybe that. And I know after I got out of coaching, I realized watching some of these other staffs meet and do some of the things, and coaching in Oklahoma like I did, where we ran the wishbone and didn't have to stay at night. It's just there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, but don't confuse activity with accomplishment. Time is your best basis there. What are you doing with the time you got? Just because you're busy doesn't mean you're getting a lot done. So hopefully maybe some of these coaches will cut back a little bit and spend a little more quality time at home.
Well, I mean, Steve Spurrier won a lot of football games by being at the golf course, apparently. So I guess there are multiple ways.
Well, he did a good job getting players, and he coached them up too. But there's plenty of time for everything. But one of the things that I think would be good for you to explain as a technical issue here, and you did a good job with the podcast that you guys had on Monday, is just explain how if I was a coach and I wanted to reach out to just my players by position, say I'm coaching the quarterbacks and I want to talk to Jamie Newman and all the other quarterbacks, how would I do that on Zoom?
Yeah, so with Zoom, it's pretty easy, especially with UGA, because the university does have an account through Zoom. And so that means any employee that has an email address to the university has access to that kind of account that they have. It's pretty much a corporate account. And from that, you host a meeting through your UGA ID, which is connected through Zoom. And then you essentially send out the link. It can be via email, you can send it through text message. It's a one-click link, and then you pop up on the screen. You can download the app if you want to. That probably tends to help. But sometimes you can just do it through your internet browser. So the fact that it's one click and then you're talking to each other, it's about as simple as video conferencing has been thus far.
So you would be as the coach and I'm the recruit, you would just send me a text and say, we're going to have a meeting at 1:00 today. Be ready for it. And then everybody would be ready to just click on and we'd get going, right?
Correct. And in the case of, I don't know if the players work with their calendars this way, but Zoom has it that when you invite someone, it has the entire calendar posting on there. So if it has the link at the top, and then underneath it with every Zoom meeting, there's an accompanying phone number that if you wanted to join just by dialing into a phone number rather than doing it through a camera and the audio with the internet, you can join that way as well.
Well, would they be able to watch tape together?
Theoretically, yes, because you can screen share through Zoom. And so if the coach has it set up on their screen on their computer, they could hit screen share and watch film together. Yeah.
Well, that's good to hear. I'm sure we're doing that too. So there's another thing that you learn by listening to Donnan and Dayne. Not much by Donnan here, but Dayne put it on us. So I appreciate that.
How do you think that Kirby Smart and really the rest of the coaches are maintaining those relationships with current players? Because we all get hyper focused on recruiting, but I've always heard coaches say you got to recruit your own guys who are already here too and make them feel special. How do you do that without that face-to-face contact so often?
Yeah, I would say that's paramount right now. Making sure. I know we've seen these online things these tweets that Coach Sinclair does for the workouts, because all of a sudden some guy might not have access to a gym. Most of these places are closed, so you got to make do with what you got. And they're using some interesting situations, to make sure they at least maintain all the. They had a tremendous off-season program. Really did a good job on weight gain. Maintaining weight where it needed to be, increasing the strength, speed, and quickness. And now all of a sudden, you're going to have a 2 or 3 month layoff of not doing anything supervised. So that's constant. There's constant feedback on that, and I know that it's not hard. Each coach has, at the most 10 players under his realm that they can contact daily through this Zoom situation or through an individual call or whatever it might be. There's unlimited calls for a coach to a player. There's no rules from the NCAA on that. But, just nutrition, what are these kids getting to eat? Can you supplement that anyway? I mean, that's certainly something that I know that everybody's concerned about. So there's definitely good dialogue there. And I know this week, the most part of it has got to be how we're going to handle the academic situation because you got to put yourself in a lot of these kids certainly are savvy about knowing how to do things with the computer, but at the same time, lots riding on their eligibility and their movement towards graduation and all that. So they're halfway through the semester now. They're going to be kind of on their own as far as making sure they take care of business, but there's certainly going to be some checkpoints there too.
And just to kind of give voice to the logistics of what that looks like, I think everyone can kind of understand that if you had a 20, 25 person class that had online classes, okay, that's a little bit of a strain on the professor or the grader's end. But when you're talking these big 300 people classes like they have for the first and second year of some courses at UGA, it gets to be pretty difficult to figure out how to shift that online coursework. So there's going to be a lot of back and forth of really some professors learning how to do this that maybe not have taught online classes as often, and then students learning how that flow goes as well. So that same adaptability you're talking about with coaches, that's happening on the academic side at UGA right now too.
Well, I'm sure they're putting everything into place, and they're going to do all they can to make sure the entire student body gets their money's worth and gets the class work they need. And I know that all these professors have a lot of pride in what they do. And before we get through today, I want to make sure to just give a shout out to wherever you are. If you're a local person working in the health providers or whatever you're doing to ensure our health and safety, I just want to say to you how much heartfelt that I feel. And I know you echo that, Dane, about the sacrifice that everybody's making to take care of us. And, it takes a pretty big strain on them. But, I know firsthand here locally because of some of the situations my wife was presented with, just unbelievable health care that we have in the local community and the sincere concern that the doctors, nurses, everybody had for her well-being and just the follow-up. I mean, it's just really remarkable what we have here. And I'm sure it's like that in most communities that people are listening to this, but let's be patient with the whole situation and understand that it's a very trying time right now.
And I can tell you off the top of my head, I know two former players that at least are based in the hospitals here in Athens. And so there's some guys that some fans would recognize that are in the midst of this some way or another. They may not be the doctor or the nurse, directly in the room, but if you're around any of it, it's a difficult thing to deal with right now. And a lot of heroes are doing some heroic things, really all around the country, but you see it in each community as well. Back on the recruiting front for a second, Georgia did pick up a new commitment this week in four-star defensive lineman Jonathan Jefferson. He is a Georgia boy staying at home, which I know is one of the focus areas for Kirby Smart is to continue to lock down the state, going forward. And I think that makes it a little easier in this time period to chat with some of those Georgia guys as well, maybe guys that have found their way to campus beforehand. One of the interesting things that Jefferson said is that based on his conversations, he felt like the upcoming class will have 4 defensive linemen. Where's your head at with the defensive line position for Georgia right now?
Well, I would like to say that there is a little silver lining in this situation from the standpoint that maybe some of these kids that might be going to a lot more visits, unofficial or official, that we've got such a head start on because they've been to Georgia to camps, to games as juniors, as sophomores, or even on an official visit, that we do have a little bit of a head start in state, I think. And this is a great year for particularly linemen in the state and some good linebacker, everybody, every position. But realistically, the thing that I like about Jefferson is the fact that he's such an athletic kid. He even plays wide receiver some, so he's got really good skill set and a tremendous student on top of that, which coming into Georgia means a lot. That he checks a lot of boxes there. You know, he starts out with a guy too that can enroll early, come in here in January, so plays basketball. You know, a lot like some of the guys that have played here before that are D linemen, and Walker. We saw what kind of ability he had this year with his speed and quickness, and the fact he could cover kicks. I mean, this kid's played outside linebacker, can move inside to defensive end, all the way down inside. He's going to get a lot bigger, and just tremendous addition to our program at this point. And you can't get enough D linemen. I don't know if we're going to take four or not. That's not my bailiwick to keep up with that. That's what Jake and Trent and those guys keep up with. But I could see us needing a couple more. With there's always going to be a transition, and we're going to need some more linebackers too, because all of a sudden we only took one last year. So, but getting Jefferson was huge for us, particularly this early, and sends a signal around the state. All of a sudden we've got four players in state. Led by Brock as a 5-star quarterback, kind of the guy that's the Pied Piper, trying to get them all in. I saw where he was keeping up with everybody, and all these kids realize when you got a quarterback, you got a chance, and the fact that he stepped up so quick should help our in-state recruiting.
One thing that Jake Roos says all the time is that there's such a shortage of really good defensive linemen. So if you find one you like, you better go ahead and get them because it's a tough position to fill. And you, being no stranger to good defensive linemen, because I always remember Seymour and Stroud under your tutelage, what do you look for in a defensive lineman when you're recruiting?
Well, we had Seymour and Stroud and Jonathan Sullivan and Ferguson and Josh Millard and uh, really had a lot of good defensive linemen. I hate to leave it. Marlis Leroy, we brought him in as a JUCO, and he ended up being a stallion and ended up playing pro ball. But for me, first you got to have enough size where you can take on blocks. There's no question. An undersized D lineman's going to have a hard time making it. But and then if you got to have enough quickness to outmaneuver an offensive lineman who can lock on you. You got to have the size and quickness. Speed's not that important. Obviously, you'd like to have it, and just overall toughness. The fact that you got a mean on all the time. I mean, you like to knock people back. You enjoy contact, and that you're a team guy. You realize you're going to take on a lot of blocks and free up the linebackers and create space for people to run around. But you got to have a little self-sacrifice in you. So I just think a long time ago, a coach told me that hey coach, these D linemen are like dinosaurs. If you see one of those dinosaurs, you better get it. And that's the truth. I mean, you gotta you see those guys, and we got a great one coming in this year with Carter, and I was impressed watching the kid run a 100-yard dash on tape here that we got coming in. Trying to think of his name. You know what I'm talking about, from down in South Georgia.
This is why I need Jake Roos on here because he's a little bit more in tune to that. Stand by, I'll grab it for you.
Yeah, I know who it is. I can't say his name, but anyhow, he's definitely another big kid that can run. So it's going to be impressive the way that we continue to bring in D linemen, linebackers, defensive ends, secondary. Like we've talked about, just an impressive group of young guys.
Well, and I think it says a lot about the job that Trey Scott has been doing too, because if it's tough to get defensive linemen, he's done a pretty good job here in the last couple
Yeah,
of
he started
classes.
rolling here the last couple of years, and he's a good technique guy, a good technician. He's a two gap guy that can coached that, which is he kind of disciple of Pete Jenkins out of LSU, who went on to the pros. But that two gap technique's important in our defense, and uh, Coach Scott does a really good job with it.
One part of the defense that I wanted to discuss with you, and it's because I've done a little bit of research on my own too. Um, when LSU played Clemson in the national championship game, Clemson had some six defensive back formations out there to try to combat that spread a little bit. And so what we're seeing is kind of an expanded role of the star and the nickel, sometimes both out there at the same time. And we saw Mark Webb and Tyreek Stevenson later in the year get on the field at the same time. What do you think that overall philosophy is? Because I think that's a relatively, at least in terms of quantity of plays for that position, it seems like it's been increasing in recent years.
Yeah, what happened with it? We played that a lot against LSU too in the championship game, and did a pretty good job in the first half. We just couldn't get any points, but held them to 19. But the evolution is if you just take your regular defense and you take one linebacker out, you go to what you call a nickel defense, where you put a different position type guy in to match the fact that they've got an extra receiver in the game, and you got to match up for the run and the pass. Well, if all of a sudden it's a down and distance where you're looking at longer distance, you can take another defensive player out and maybe put another defensive player in as a defensive back to give you what we call a dime or six defensive back. We call the one guy the star and the other guy the money player. And I don't know how that comes about, but that's just what how it's talked about here. But the idea is that you're able to match up against an inside receiver a lot better than a linebacker would, or I'm talking about a slot receiver or an extra wide receiver. And what's happened, and where LSU was really good last year, and this is, I'm not trying to get too technical with the fans, but just from the standpoint of LSU, was able to run hurry up stuff without substitute. So they're were able to run all their formations with their regular people in the game, which is one tight end, three wide receivers, and one back. So that one back could shift out and be, Edwards could be a wide receiver, could be a slot or whatever. So you can't substitute with them because they're not substituting. The rule is the official has to stop. Everybody sees that official over the ball. He has to stop play and let you substitute. So consequently, teams like Clemson and us just came out with our regular defense and played the dime instead of playing the nickel. So you got six people in there. So if they do shift, you hope that you can hold up on the run. If they don't, and if they do, you're better off. So here's the nomenclature. A star guy is a really tough defender that can play the run or the pass like an outside linebacker. But you want a guy that's a little bit better as a defensive back, then that's where you see a guy like Webb or Devod Wilson playing there. Devod actually practiced a little bit at star because he's the backup, and a little bit at corner where he can play corner or star, and then Webb practices at star, and then he also learns how to play the bunny position, the sixth defensive back, so he can substitute if something would happen to Stevenson. Stevenson plays all the time, mostly as a regular corner, but at the end of the year, we got him in the game as a dime guy. So realistically, quickly, a coherent thing here is if you got one defensive back in the game, you're going to probably be either Webb or Devod Wilson, and they're really good against the pass first and really good against the run. If you're playing regular defense, you probably got an outside linebacker in there that's probably better against the run and limited on the pass. And if you go to dime, you got a really good cover guy like one of the fastest guys in the nation in Stevenson to come in there and play the good receivers if they try to jack around with their receivers and all of a sudden take Jefferson instead of playing him outside, bring him inside to try to get the mismatch that LSU did. Now you got a guy like Campbell playing him man to man instead of a linebacker.
One I think from what I saw in some film review was Georgia was doing a bit more of the defensive back blitzing from the edges, and so then that was more helpful to have a Mark Webb or a Tyreek Stevenson who are fast and very physical to be able to fight through maybe a chip block or something to get to the quarterback faster. I think we saw that against Auburn a couple of times.
Yeah, one thing you like to do, just like the offense runs all their package from that formation grouping, you like to be able to do as much as you can defensively and not just be a check where you end up just being pretty base in that. You like to be able to be multiple pressure from those star guys, double with those star guys, pressure from your money guy, double with your money guy. Do all that stuff and still be cohesive in your defensive look. A couple of years ago, we played Auburn over here the whole game and played. They tried to play four wide receivers against us, and we held up against the run, unbelievable. Kirby and Tucker just did a terrific job. We did stuff them. You remember they went down the field on the first drive, and then they didn't do anything else. We just really did a good job with six defensive backs against them then. So we've got a very deep secondary, and I feel good about the way they train them. Coach Warren is a tremendous coach. Everybody knows the backlog of Kirby's career. He's developed so many good defensive backs, you can't even name them. And then Coach Lanning has a really good grasp of the front and the package that you have to play behind it.
That was insightful to me. And the reason I ask is because it's one of the more interesting positions on the field. I mean, you see a Mark Webb lined up in the slot against Florida, and then a few weeks earlier, you saw him lined up against the big tight end, against Notre Dame that was giving Georgia some issues. And so it just takes a really good athlete and a really smart player to succeed in that position. But if you do it right, then you end up with what Alabama had with Minkah Fitzpatrick a few years ago, where it just
Right.
completely transforms your defense.
And if you want to make your mouth water as far as a coach, you just walk in the weight room and see Mark Webb cut the way he's cut. I mean, he's cut like you want to be cut to play that position. And Devad is too. I mean, he's got a lot stronger. He came in as a skinny guy from South Florida, but he's really worked hard on his weight training. And then, of course, Camel's just a freakish type athlete, the way he can run and jump, and he got tremendous athleticism. One of the best pure athletes we have in our program.
Kirby Smart likes seeing those defensive backs get built up that way and still be fast. Well, Coach,
Right.
the way I want to wrap this up every week now, we're kind of still finding our footing on how we want to do this. But you coach a lot of great players, and I love kind of mining for those stories a little bit. So I'm just going to throw a name at you, and you can take this where you want to of someone that you've coached or a story, whether it be funny, whether it be an impressive play they had. You take this where you want to. Will Witherspoon.
Well, Will Witherspoon's one of my favorite players. We were able to recruit him out of Panama City, Florida. Greg Atkins had that area, and I kept telling him, I said, how in the world are we going to get this guy away from Auburn and Florida? And I said, we got some good guys coming in here, Tony Gilbert and Boss Bailey, and we even had Kwika Mitchell, who we had committed early out of Orlando. But he said, Coach, we've got a chance. And boy, I tell you, the spring that I went down there before his senior year, he was running the 100-yard dash and just a fast guy. He had a good mom and daddy, and his dad and mom ended up moving up here, and his dad worked over here, and as a mechanic. And then, unfortunately, his mother passed away about 3 or 4 years ago. But I'm going to tell you now, this kid, very intelligent and could had the ability to jump in there right away. Just knew what to do, and he was great on special teams. But the play that I remember more than any is against LSU when they decided to go for two. We had the game under control, and then had a couple fumbles, and then it was such a sad day because it was a week after Coach Watson had passed away, and our whole team was in complete disarray, and we just didn't have a very good idea about what everything was just up and down. And we were trying to play good, but we didn't play as good as we needed to. But anyhow, the game goes into a situation where they could go for one and kick the extra point, go to overtime, or go for two. and they decide to go for two, and they roll out, and it looks like they're trying to run a flood. Then they throw the ball back against the grain, and here comes Will out of nowhere like a bullet and knocks the ball straight to the ground. It looked like he could have intercepted, but I think he was just so glad to be in position. And everybody in Sanford Stadium was glad. Nobody was more happy than me because, Coach DiNardo is a good friend of mine, and I'd hate for him to beat us there in Sanford Stadium. But we were kind of dedicated to that game to Coach Watson. We actually wore white pants that day. Coach Watson was in charge of our equipment, and he had ordered some white pants for a special occasion. We probably would have never worn them if it hadn't been for him passing away, but we wore those that day and got the win for him.
Well, that's a fitting tribute that I think anyone around the football program would appreciate. So we'll do that at the end of every episode of Donnan and Dayne and just kind of throw a name at you and see what story comes out. Because one thing I've learned from kind of being your friend for the last couple of years, Coach, is you got more stories than I think I could ever hear. So I'm excited to see what's in there.
Yeah, I hope we can. And I think that kid's first name is Octavius. I can't remember his last name, but that kid we're talking about that can really run a defensive lineman, and hopefully Jake will fill us in on who it is. But hope everybody enjoyed this and understand that we're just trying to keep you all happy during these trying times and keep you up to date on what's going on as much as we can figure out about things. But I know this, that our team will be prepared regardless of whatever the consequences are or what happens as far as when they start or when they don't. But, the main thing right now that Kirby's preaching, and I know that every coach is, let's get this virus under control because there's too many things happening that we just don't know about.
Yeah, football's a good distraction, but we do have to kind of, what does Kirby say? Keep the main thing, right?
Exactly.
All right, Coach. I appreciate it, and we'll do it again next week.